Hello! So, I'm going to give you a broad overview of archetypes, including their history, and also what they mean to us today. So let's dive right in. We're going to start with the history. The history, in some part, comes from Plato and his philosophy of ideal forms. Where he proposed that for every object you encounter, there is an ideal form somewhere in a realm you cannot access, and that ideal form is the reason why the object you are seeing has the form that it takes. So, for example, if I see a tree outside my window, somewhere there's an ideal tree that this tree is a poor shadow of. So that is Plato's philosophy. We are moving forward in time quite a bit to the 1900s, where we have Sigmund Freud and his idea of the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is what drives all of your behavior, according to Freud. And if we can figure out what's happening in your unconscious mind, we can determine why you are acting like you are. So he wanted you to become aware of what's going on underneath the surface in your unconscious mind. Now, this was somewhat of a revolutionary idea, that you were not in control of what you were doing. So that took the world by storm a little bit. A lot of Freud's practice in psychology has been debunked now, but this idea has persisted that there are a set of drives that influence your behavior, especially with the advent of certain scientific advances that can track the chemicals in your brain and other activity in your body that does in fact influence your behavior. So Freud had somewhat of a right idea, but just was not quite able to justify his thinking very well. Or at least that's the current perception. So his disciple or follower, Carl Jung, took the logic a little bit further and said, well, okay, so people have individual unconscious drives. What if there are similarities between those unconscious drives? So, for example, what if everybody's seeing similar patterns in the world because our minds are hardwired to see those patterns, and we get this general idea of the collective unconsciousness or collective unconscious mind, where everything is shared among people. So if I see in my dreams angels or whatever, chances are other people have seen that too, and chances are it has a significance for them that is similar to the significance that it has for me, or what have you, or a flood, or darkness, or sunlight, or fire, or water. All of these things have a significance, according to Jung, that is recognizable across different cultures and across different people groups, and that basically allows you to communicate these ideas across cultures and between people. So that is what an archetype really lets you do, is say that, okay, I have this idea of water, and if I put it up on my screen in front of you in a movie theater, chances are you're going to have a similar idea, particularly if I set this stage accordingly. So for the movie Titanic, where the Titanic is sinking because of an iceberg in the middle of the ocean, chances are people are going to sense the same fear, the same peril at the endlessness of the ocean, the lack of help, the lack of other people around you, that sort of thing. So that's kind of where we're going with this, is to say yeah, there are some commonalities, and we can recognize them, and we can even use them to communicate with each other, which is where art comes in. We evoke certain ideas in art to be able to tell each other, hey, this is what I'm trying to talk about. Is this feeling? Have you ever had that feeling? And what do we do about it? And to raise those sort of questions. So that is what archetypes are there for. So to reiterate, an archetype is either a situation in art, or a character in art, or an object in art that shows up over and over again to the point where it becomes easily recognizable. Like, oh, they're getting married. All you have to do is see a flowers and a bouquet, and most people will think marriage. Or even if that's not your cultural indicator of marriage, you can probably pick up the idea when you see the two going away together on a honeymoon, or that sort of thing. There's probably some cultural crossover for you between the idea of a marriage. Even if it's not your culture's standard for marriage, you could probably deduce what was going on very shortly. So archetypes are a shorthand for artists to be able to play on certain emotions and to be able to evoke certain ideas. So I want to go over the types of archetype I mentioned, namely situational, object, and character archetype. And in order to do that, I'm going to mention a few different types of each. So if I have, for example, a wedding ring, that is an object archetype. A wedding ring would symbolize eternity, or just a ring in general symbolizes eternity by virtue of being round. It never ends. You keep going around and around and around. So eternity, which is why we often use the ring as a symbol of love, as a symbol of the promise we make when we get married. So you have that as a object archetype. There are also symbolic archetypes. I tend to view them as overlapping with object archetypes because, frankly, most of them are objects. Like, if you have water in baptism, water is an object. It's also a symbol of death and burial and resurrection in the Christian tradition, but it really is an object archetype, in my opinion. A lot of symbols are object archetypes. Or if you have a rose, it symbolizes passion or love or desire, or all these other interesting romantic overtones that come with that particular object. So basically those are object archetypes, are recurring objects that are immediately recognizable to most people as having a certain meaning. So there are situational archetypes. I already mentioned a wedding. That is a very big situational archetype. If you look at Shakespeare, Shakespeare is kind of the king of archetypes. Either everybody is dying in his plays and it's a tragedy, or everybody is getting married and it's a comedy. And those archetypal situations kind of clue us in. Okay, this is sad. Everybody's dead. You know, so this is a tragedy. Or everybody's getting married. Wow, you know, that's really happy. It's a comedy. So Shakespeare uses those archetypal situations in his plays to kind of indicate how we're supposed to be feeling, how we're supposed to be perceiving what's going on. So there is a sense in which those are two symbolic situational archetypes that tell us this is, I want you to feel happy, I want you to feel sad. So situational archetypes are events that mark the change from a person, in a person, from one state to another. So from not being married to being married, from being alive to being dead, from being unborn to being born. All of these things could be situational archetypes. So that's the end of the situational archetype. There's plenty more types, graduations, birthdays, you name it. There's probably a situational archetype attached to some of these major life milestones. So, you know, you can fill in the blank for yourself a little bit. Okay, we're going to keep going. There are also archetypes of character. So archetypes of character, for example, you have people who tend to take on certain roles. So your mom and your dad, or your caretaker, is an archetype. Your dad probably acts a certain way. Maybe he's more stern, maybe he's more discipline oriented, and your mom is more generous and easygoing and lets you get away with more, or is more relaxed around you. That's a character archetype. There's also character archetypes, like a teacher might be a character archetype, where that person has certain character traits that, we notice over and over again, like they tend to care about how we think, and they might give us intellectual puzzles to figure out and be happy when we do figure them out and be sad when we don't. And there's certain stereotypical associations we have with that teacher-student relationship, student another character archetype. There's the counselor advisor, for getting more abstract, a little bit like a Gandalf type figure, or in Harry Potter, Dumbledore is a counselor, or Professor Lupin is a counselor. They all give Harry advice, and he is supposed to follow it. And sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't. But those are counselor figures. There's trickster figures, like Satan is a trickster figure in the Bible. He tells people lies, and they believe those lies because they are very compelling lies, and they tell people what they want to believe. So that's a trickster figure. Loki in Norse mythology is a trickster figure. There's some other stories that have a monkey god, or just a monkey animal that tricks the other animals into doing what he wants. So some tricksters are more mean and some are more nice, but those are archetypes as well. So you kind of have a broad spectrum there. There are archetypes of place. Some archetypes of place include, like, a city is a place archetype. If you've ever been to a major city like Chicago or New York, or in Europe, Rome, or there's a lot of big cities. You can fill in the blank for your region of the world. If you have been to one of those major cities, you can identify some characteristics of a city that are common. They're crowded, they have lots of people, there's lots of activity, there's lots of fun things to do, but sometimes there's lots of crime, or there's lots of danger in your city, and you have to be careful, and it's overcrowded and polluted and smells bad, or whatever. There's a lot of traits of a city that you could have, as opposed to the country is another archetypal place where you have free air and room to run around and do everything and breathe, and you're more spread out, and it's more natural, and everybody's living life at a relaxed pace, supposedly, and all of that good stuff comes with the country. But sometimes with the country you get this negative picture of, well, these people are uneducated or simple, or ill-mannered, or sometimes there's joblessness or unemployment, and people are struggling to make ends meet, and that's sad. And the country can be a place of loneliness, as opposed to the city where you're never alone, and that sort of thing. So there's a positive and negative side to both of these location archetypes, these place archetypes. So there's that. We've already covered characters, so I feel like we have come to a good place to stop. So this is probably the best summary I can make of archetypes for you. So I hope this helped. We're going to do some exercises now in class, if you are in my class, about archetypes, so you will definitely get the hang of this by the time the course ends. Alright, it's been fun. We'll keep going, so look forward to it. Bye.